This worthless garbage doesn't deserve to speak. His finger jabbed toward me as silence descended across the meeting room. 20 of the most influential business leaders in the region froze, uncomfortable witnesses to my public humiliation. The glossy conference table reflected their stunned expressions as they shifted in their seats. Nobody dared to intervene. Nathaniel, the CEO's son, stood tall in his custom-tailored suit, a smirk playing on his lips as he basked in his perceived untouchability. His father, Edmund, stared at his notes, pretending not to notice his son's behavior. I took a slow, measured breath and met Nathaniel's eyes directly. "That's interesting coming from you." My voice remained steady as I slid a manila folder across the polished surface toward him. Confusion flickered across his face as he flipped it open. The confident smirk evaporated instantly. His face drained of color as he stared at the contents, then back at me with dawning recognition. "Who exactly are you?" he whispered, voice barely audible. I rose from my chair, smoothed my skirt, and addressed the room. "My name is Mirabelle Reed. My grandmother, Virginia Reed, founded this company 60 years ago." The gasp that swept through the boardroom was audible. Edmund's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock. "And today," I continued, "things are going to change around here." Before I tell you what happened next, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. Many people hear stories like mine but never engage or subscribe, missing the chance to hear how these situations truly resolve. If my experience resonates with you, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future uploads that might help you navigate your own challenging situations. Now, let me take you back to how this all began. 3 months before that fateful board meeting, I joined Ascendant Innovations as an entry-level project coordinator. Despite my qualifications, a master's degree in business development, and 5 years of experience at competing firms, I was relegated to making coffee runs and taking meeting notes. My grandmother Virginia built Ascendant from nothing in the 1960s, working 18-hour days while raising 3 children alone after my grandfather passed away. She was a visionary, creating a company culture decades ahead of its time with profit sharing for employees, flexible work arrangements, and an emphasis on work-life balance that was revolutionary for the era. When she retired 15 years ago, she sold the company to Edmund with specific conditions protecting employees and company values. What most people didn't know was that my mother, Cordelia, inherited a significant portion of voting shares but remained a silent investor, never setting foot in the corporate offices. I grew up hearing stories about Ascendant, how it began at my grandmother's kitchen table, how she fought to be taken seriously in a male-dominated industry, and how she created opportunities for hundreds of families. But in recent years, troubling reports had reached us. Employee satisfaction had plummeted, turnover rates had tripled. The company's charitable foundation had mysteriously reduced its activities. "Something isn't right," my mother had said one evening, reviewing the quarterly reports. "The numbers look good on paper, but these employee surveys tell a different story." That's when we hatched our plan. I would apply for a position under my married name, which was different from my mother's maiden name. I would observe the company culture from within, document any issues, and report back. If things were as bad as we feared, my mother would consider invoking her rarely used veto power over major company decisions. My first day at Ascendant was eye-opening. The warm, collaborative atmosphere my grandmother described had been replaced by competitive tension. People worked in isolation, afraid to share ideas. The open-door policy was gone. Executives worked behind keycard-protected doors on the top floor. Then I met Nathaniel. At 32, he was only 2 years older than me but carried himself with the entitled confidence of someone who'd never faced a meaningful obstacle. As the VP of Operations and the CEO's only son, he was positioned as the company's future. He roamed the office floors like a king surveying his kingdom. "You must be new," he said during my first week, finding me organizing presentation materials in the main conference room. "Make sure the water glasses are filled before the executives arrive." And I take my coffee black, 2 sugars. I'm actually the new project coordinator, I replied. Mirabelle. He barely glanced at my extended hand. Right. Well, the coffee station is down the hall. We still need those waters filled. This became our pattern. Despite my role, Nathaniel would find ways to assign me menial tasks. When I submitted project ideas, they were dismissed without consideration. In meetings, he talked over me or claimed my suggestions weren't ambitious enough for Ascendant's vision. What he didn't know was that I documented everything, every dismissed idea, every instance of taking credit for others' work. Every time he belittled female employees while praising men for identical contributions. Eliza from marketing had created an innovative social media strategy that Nathaniel presented as his own. Tomas from product development was reprimanded for insubordination after questioning the safety testing timeline for a new release. Dozens of small injustices that added up to a company culture my grandmother would have found unrecognizable. I also discovered more serious issues. Financial reports with discrepancies. Company resources diverted to startups mysteriously connected to Nathaniel's college friends. Customer complaints buried rather than addressed. How are things going? My mother asked during our weekly check-ins. Worse than we thought, I admitted. The company values only exist in the employee handbook now. In practice, it's becoming a toxic environment. As weeks passed, I built alliances with other employees who remembered the old Ascendant or who simply wanted a more equitable workplace. Daniela from HR shared historical employee satisfaction data showing the decline. Winston from accounting quietly pointed out budget irregularities. Even Edmund's executive assistant, Beatrice, who had worked for my grandmother decades ago, sensed something was wrong but couldn't pinpoint the cause. Virginia would be heartbroken, Beatrice whispered one afternoon, finding me working late. This company was her fourth child. She nurtured it with the same love. What changed? I asked. Edmund was good at first, she said. But when Nathaniel joined 5 years ago, something shifted. Edmund started deferring to him more and more. Now it feels like Nathaniel is really running things and not for the better. I needed concrete evidence before my mother could take action. The quarterly board meeting, where major strategic decisions would be made, presented the perfect opportunity. I prepared a comprehensive market analysis showing how returning to the company's original values could actually increase profitability and market share. The night before the meeting, I carefully organized my presentation and supporting data. I placed a small photograph of my grandmother on my nightstand, a reminder of what I was fighting for. "Wish me luck, Grandma," I whispered before turning out the light. The board meeting began at 9 a.m. sharp. Executives and board members filed in, making small talk as they settled into their seats. I sat quietly at the far end, officially there to take notes. Edmund called the meeting to order, moving through agenda items with practiced efficiency. When Nathaniel rose to present the quarterly strategy, my heart began to pound. I watched in disbelief as he unveiled slides containing my market analysis, the very work he had dismissed weeks earlier when I presented it. He had removed my name and added his own, presenting my research and conclusions as original insights he had developed. "As you can see," he said confidently, "my approach would reposition us advantageously against our competitors." My hand rose almost involuntarily. "Excuse me." All eyes turned to me. Nathaniel's expression darkened. "I believe there's been a mistake," I said. "That analysis was submitted by me last month. I have the original documents with timestamps." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Nathaniel forced a laugh. "I'm not sure what our note-taker is referring to," he said dismissively. "Perhaps she saw early drafts of my work." "That's not true," I insisted, my voice stronger now. "This is my analysis, word for word." That's when it happened. Nathaniel's professional veneer cracked completely. "This worthless garbage doesn't deserve to speak," he shouted, jabbing his finger toward me. And we returned to the moment where our story began, my humiliation followed by my revelation of who I truly was. The contents of the folder I'd slid to Nathaniel contained 3 things: a DNA test confirming my lineage to Virginia Reed, my grandmother's original contract highlighting the ethical conduct clauses, and the board's succession plan naming my mother as emergency controller should the company violate its founding principles. As the board members processed this information, the conference room door opened. My mother, Cordelia Reed, walked in, her first time entering the building in 15 years. The resemblance to my grandmother was striking enough that several older board members audibly gasped. "I believe my daughter has identified some concerns about the company's current direction," she said calmly, taking a seat at the head of the table, the chair Edmund typically occupied. Edmund found his voice first. "Cordelia, this is highly irregular. If you had concerns, proper channels—" "Proper channels?" my mother interrupted. "Like the quarterly reviews you've been sending me with falsified employee satisfaction data? Or the ethical compliance reports that somehow failed to mention the 7 discrimination complaints filed this year alone?" I distributed folders to each board member containing evidence of everything I'd discovered during my 3 months undercover. For the next hour, we methodically walked through the documentation, the toxic management practices, the misallocation of resources, the suppression of innovation, all leading to the company's declining reputation and staff retention problems. Nathaniel sat frozen, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Edmund alternated between defensive arguments and stunned silence as decades of carefully maintained control slipped through his fingers. "So what happens now?" asked Desiree, the longest-serving board member. "Are you invoking your control rights?" My mother looked at me, then back to the board. "That depends on what actions this board is willing to take." What followed was an intense negotiation that lasted well into the evening. Board members stepped out to make phone calls to legal advisors. Preliminary votes were taken. Arguments broke out and were resolved. Through it all, my mother remained calm but unmovable on key points. By 8 p.m., exhausted but determined, we reached an agreement. Edmund would remain CEO, but with significantly reduced autonomy. A new ethics committee would be established with representatives from all levels of the company. My mother would take an active board seat to oversee the transition. And Nathaniel? The room fell silent when my mother outlined his future. "Effective immediately, Nathaniel will be reassigned to our customer service department for 6 months," she announced. "His performance reviews will come directly from the employees he's treated poorly. His future at this company depends entirely on whether he can learn the value of those he called worthless." Nathaniel jumped to his feet. "This is absurd. I have executive experience. You can't possibly expect me to—" "Your other option is resignation," I said quietly, "with no severance and no reference." His face flushed with anger as he looked around the room for allies, finding none. Even his father remained silent, knowing the alternative was losing the company entirely. "Fine," Nathaniel spat. "I'll play your little game. But don't expect me to—" "This isn't a game," my mother interrupted. "This is accountability. Something this company was founded on. Something you'll have the opportunity to learn about from the ground up." As the meeting finally adjourned, board members approached me one by one, some apologetic for never noticing what was happening, others expressing relief that change was coming. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication certainly, but also sadness that intervention had been necessary at all. Edmund was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said softly, surprising me. I lost sight of what she built. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing numbers instead of people. When only my mother and I remained, she squeezed my hand. "The hard part starts tomorrow," she warned. "Changing a culture isn't as simple as changing leadership." "I know," I replied, "but it's worth fighting for." Little did I know just how difficult that fight would be, or that our most unexpected ally would emerge from the most unlikely source. The next morning, I arrived at Ascendant headquarters earlier than usual. The building felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves had witnessed yesterday's power shift and were holding their breath to see what happened next. Beatrice was already at her desk, organizing files with renewed energy. "Everyone's talking about what happened," she whispered. "Some are terrified, others are hopeful. A few executives were here until midnight clearing out their offices." Clearing out? I hadn't expected immediate resignations. 3 VPs who were particularly close to Nathaniel. They saw the writing on the wall. Her eyes sparkled with something I hadn't seen before: hope. "Is it true? Are you really Virginia's granddaughter?" I nodded. She clasped my hand. "I've waited 15 years for this day." Word spread quickly. As employees arrived, many stared at me with new interest. Some avoided eye contact entirely. By 9 a.m., my mother had called an all-hands meeting in the atrium. Almost 400 employees gathered, buzzing with speculation. Edmund stood awkwardly beside my mother as she addressed the company. She introduced herself, explained her ownership stake, and outlined the leadership changes that would take effect immediately. "For too long, this company has drifted from its founding values," she said. "Today, we begin the journey back." Then she introduced me. As I stepped forward, I spotted Nathaniel at the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes burning with resentment. "Many of you know me as Mirabelle, a project coordinator who joined 3 months ago," I began. "What you don't know is why I came here." My grandmother founded Ascendant with a vision of what a workplace could be, one where every voice matters, where innovation is celebrated regardless of title, where people are valued above profit margins. I saw nodding heads, particularly among older employees who remembered my grandmother's era. "I've worked alongside you, experienced the same frustrations, witnessed the same dismissals of good ideas. Starting today, we're building systems to ensure everyone is heard." I outlined the new ethics committee structure, the anonymous reporting system, and the cultural transformation initiative we'd be launching. As I spoke, I could see hope blooming across many faces. Others looked skeptical, perhaps having heard similar promises before. Change won't happen overnight. I acknowledged. Trust has been broken. It must be rebuilt through consistent action, not just words. I'm asking for your patience, and more importantly, your participation. After the meeting, my new office was flooded with employees sharing stories, suggestions, and in some cases, documentation of past abuses they'd witnessed but been afraid to report. I barely had time to eat that day, listening to person after person who finally felt safe enough to speak. Meanwhile, Nathaniel reported to the customer service floor for his first day in his new role. Petra, the customer service director, was a no-nonsense woman who had survived multiple attempts by Nathaniel to have her department outsourced. "Your training begins today," she told him, handing him a headset. "You'll shadow Kyrie for the morning, then handle calls yourself this afternoon." "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I have an MBA from—" "That won't help you calm down a customer whose shipment arrived damaged." Petra interrupted. "Here, we value emotional intelligence and problem-solving under pressure. Your education means nothing if you can't connect with people." I received hourly updates about Nathaniel's first day. He removed his headset 3 times during difficult calls. He argued with Petra about proper protocols. By day's end, he had the lowest customer satisfaction rating in department history. "He won't last a week," Daniela from HR predicted during our end-of-day debrief. "He doesn't have a choice," I reminded her. "This is his only path to redemption." The first month was chaotic. Edmund resisted many changes, particularly those requiring greater financial transparency. 2 more executives resigned rather than adapt to the new culture. My mother attended daily leadership meetings, firmly redirecting conversations whenever they veered toward old patterns. I focused on rebuilding the innovation pipeline that had been stifled under Nathaniel's leadership. We created cross-functional teams to evaluate ideas based on merit rather than who proposed them. Within weeks, promising concepts that had been shelved for years were being developed. Eliza from marketing, whose social media strategy Nathaniel had stolen, was promoted to lead our digital transformation initiative. Tomas from product development was given resources to improve safety testing. Small victories accumulated, building momentum. But the real drama unfolded in customer service. Nathaniel's performance remained abysmal. Customers complained about his condescending tone. Colleagues reported his attempts to delegate his tasks. Petra documented every infraction, creating a file thick enough to justify termination. 6 weeks into his reassignment, Nathaniel didn't show up for work. Security cameras showed him entering the executive floor instead, using his still active keycard. I found him in his father's office, both men looking guilty when I walked in. "This isn't what it looks like," Edmund began. "It looks like you're undermining the board's decision," I said, maintaining calm despite my anger. "It looks like Nathaniel is avoiding his responsibilities." "This punishment has made its point," Nathaniel argued. "I've learned my lesson. I'm ready to return to appropriate work." "What lesson have you learned exactly?" I asked. His answer was revealing: that actions have consequences, that I should be more careful about how I speak to people in public settings. Not that people deserved respect, not that he'd been wrong, just that he should be more cautious about his public behavior. "Your reassignment continues," I said firmly, "and Edmund, the next breach of our agreement will be reported to the board." That evening, I received a call from my mother. "Nathaniel's grandmother is requesting a meeting with us." His grandmother? I didn't realize she was still alive. "Very much alive, Imogene Bartlett. She's 85 and apparently still formidable." The name struck a chord in my memory. Wait, wasn't she on the board when Grandma was running the company? Yes, they were friends once, before the acquisition. Now she wants to see us tomorrow at her home. The next morning, we drove to an elegant colonial house in the historic district. A housekeeper led us to a sunroom where an elderly woman sat regally in a wingback chair. Despite her age, Imogene's eyes were sharp as they assessed us. "You look just like her," she said to my mother. "Virginia always said Cordelia got her stubbornness. And you," she turned to me, "have her strategist's mind." Infiltrating the company undercover, she would have loved that move. "You knew my grandmother well?" I asked. "We were business partners before we were friends. I was the first investor in Ascendant, back when banks wouldn't lend to a widowed woman with 3 children. She gestured to photos on a side table, younger versions of herself and my grandmother at various company events. "Then why did you support Edmund buying the company?" my mother asked. Imogene sighed. "Virginia was retiring. Your brothers had no interest in the business. You were building your own career. Edmund seemed the best option to maintain Virginia's legacy." Her face hardened. "I never anticipated my grandson would undo so much of what we built." "That's why we've intervened," I explained. "By humiliating him publicly and demoting him to answering phones?" Imogene raised an eyebrow. "You've wounded his pride, but have you changed his understanding?" Her question caught me off guard. "What would you suggest?" Nathaniel lacks context. He sees Ascendant as his birthright, not as something built through sacrifice and vision. He needs education more than punishment. She outlined a proposal. Nathaniel would continue working in customer service, but would also spend one evening each week with Imogene, learning the company's true history. She would share original documents, introduce him to retired employees from the early days, and help him understand the values that made Ascendant successful in the first place. "He respects me, even if he respects few others," she said. "Let me try to reach him." My mother and I exchanged glances. "We can add this to his program," I agreed cautiously, "but the customer service requirement stands." "As it should," Imogene nodded. "My grandson needs both the stick and the carrot, I'm afraid." When we informed Nathaniel of this additional requirement, his reaction surprised me. "Grandmother wants to meet with me weekly? About company history?" For the first time, he seemed genuinely intrigued rather than resentful. "She feels you would benefit from understanding Ascendant's origins," I explained. "Fine." He shrugged with feigned indifference. "If that's what it takes to get through this charade." The following weeks brought subtle changes. Nathaniel's customer service performance improved marginally. He stopped arriving late. Petra reported fewer complaints. Most significantly, he began asking questions during training sessions instead of merely enduring them. Meanwhile, company-wide initiatives gained traction. The Ethics Committee, comprised of employees from every level and department, reviewed policies and practices with fresh eyes. Sales began to rebound as customer satisfaction scores improved. The innovation pipeline filled with promising ideas. Edmund remained a complex figure in this transition. Some days he embraced the changes, acknowledging they were necessary. Other days he resisted, particularly when they reduced his unilateral authority. My mother handled him skillfully, recognizing his pride needed preservation even as his power was checked. 3 months after the board meeting confrontation, we held a company-wide celebration to mark the official relaunch of Ascendant's Employee Scholarship Program, something my grandmother had started, but Nathaniel had quietly defunded years earlier. As I prepared to announce the first recipients, I noticed Nathaniel enter the atrium. He stood at the back, still separate from the group, but present in a way he hadn't been at previous all-hands gatherings. Imogene joined him moments later, patting his arm with grandmotherly affection. After the ceremony, he approached me as I gathered my notes. "My grandmother showed me the original scholarship documents," he said without preamble. "Your grandmother personally wrote recommendation letters for every recipient." I nodded. She believed education was the greatest equalizer. "She wrote one for my mother," he continued. "Did you know that?" This was news to me. No, I didn't. My mother was a receptionist here before she married my father. Virginia Reed paid for her to get her accounting degree. His eyes held something unfamiliar, humility, perhaps. I never knew that story. My parents never told me. Before I could respond, he walked away, leaving me wondering what other revelations Imogene had shared during their weekly sessions. The next morning, Petra called me directly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You need to come to customer service. Now." I rushed downstairs, imagining the worst. Nathaniel had quit, had a meltdown, insulted a major client. Instead, I found him at his desk, calmly talking a customer through troubleshooting steps for our software. "Thank you for your patience, Mrs. Hoffman," he was saying. "I know this is frustrating. Let's try one more approach." His tone was patient, empathetic even. When the call ended successfully, he made detailed notes in the system before moving to the next call in queue. "He's been like this all morning," Petra whispered. "Yesterday too. It's like someone performed an exorcism." I watched him work for several minutes. The transformation wasn't complete. I could still see flashes of frustration, moments where he had to visibly restrain himself from being condescending. But the effort was undeniable. Later that week, I met with Imogene again, curious about what had prompted this change. "I showed him the ledgers," she explained, pouring tea. "The early years when Virginia took no salary so employees could be paid. The loan she secured using her house as collateral. The acquisition offers she refused because the buyers wouldn't guarantee employee protections. And that affected him? Nathaniel respects builders. He's been raised to value creation and legacy. When he understood what Virginia truly built and how, it reframed his understanding of the company. She stirred honey into her tea. I also told him about his mother. He mentioned that. What he didn't tell you is how it challenged his worldview. He's always believed success comes from privilege and connections. Learning his own mother rose through merit shook his assumptions. 4 months into our company reformation, Nathaniel's customer service term was approaching its end. The ethics committee would evaluate his performance and make recommendations about his future role. As committee chair, I recused myself from the decision to avoid any appearance of personal vendetta. The morning of their deliberation, I received an unexpected email from Nathaniel requesting a private meeting. Curious, I agreed to see him that afternoon. He arrived at my office precisely on time, more casually dressed than I'd ever seen him in the workplace, khakis and a button-down rather than his usual designer suit. I want to withdraw from consideration for any executive positions, he said immediately after sitting down. What? This was the last thing I expected. The ethics committee is deciding my fate today. I'm removing myself from consideration for any leadership role. Why? He took a deep breath. Because I'm not ready. These past months have shown me how much damage I've done and how much I still have to learn. I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or strategy. What are you proposing instead? I want to create a new role, Community Impact Coordinator. I would work with the ethics committee to rebuild relationships with employees we've lost, clients we've alienated, and community partners we've neglected. The proposal was thoughtful, addressing real needs while keeping him in a position where he could continue learning without direct authority over others. This isn't what I expected from you, I admitted. 4 months ago, I called you worthless garbage, he said quietly. I believed power came from making others feel small. I was wrong. My grandmother and your grandmother both knew better. I'm just starting to understand what they built and why it matters. His words seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. The committee will consider your proposal alongside other options. That's all I ask. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. I owe you a public apology. Not because the rules require it, but because it's right. The next day at the all-hands meeting, Nathaniel requested time to speak. Edmund looked nervous. My mother watched with guarded curiosity. The room fell silent as he took the microphone. 4 months ago, I publicly humiliated Mirabelle Reed in the boardroom, he began. I called her worthless garbage and attempted to silence her contributions. I was wrong. Not just because she turned out to be the founder's granddaughter, though that certainly made my behavior even more foolish, but because no one deserves to be treated that way. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I've spent these months learning what Ascendant was built to be and how far I helped drive it from that vision. I've heard your stories of ideas dismissed, contributions stolen, and talents wasted. For my role in creating that culture, I apologize. He continued, outlining specific changes he'd witnessed in himself and the company. The speech wasn't perfect. At times, his privilege still showed through, but it was unmistakably sincere. When he finished, Imogene was the first to applaud, followed gradually by others. Not everyone joined. Some wounds were too fresh, some skepticism too deep, but it was a beginning. The ethics committee announced their decision the following day. Nathaniel would not return to executive leadership. Instead, they approved his community impact coordinator role with a 1-year probationary period and quarterly reviews. 6 months after my confrontation in the boardroom, Ascendant had transformed. Employee retention improved 40%. Innovation flourished. The company culture began reflecting my grandmother's original vision, not perfectly, but genuinely. Edmund announced his retirement. Effective the following year, the board would conduct an external search for his replacement, with my mother leading the selection committee. As for Nathaniel, his transformation continued unevenly but consistently. He worked alongside employees he'd once dismissed, learning from their expertise. The Community Impact Initiative gained traction, rebuilding relationships he'd damaged. During the company's annual charity gala, I found myself alone with him on the terrace, both of us taking a break from the crowded ballroom. Your grandmother would be proud, he said, echoing his father's words from months earlier. You've restored her legacy. We've restored it, I corrected. All of us together. No, you did something more important, he insisted. You could have destroyed me, exposed everything publicly, forced me out completely. It would have been justified after how I treated you and others. That wasn't the goal. I know that now. Real power isn't about crushing opponents. It's about transformation. He looked out at the city lights. My grandmother tells me Virginia used to say, when you have the power to destroy someone but choose to educate them instead, you create an ally rather than a casualty. I smiled, hearing my grandmother's wisdom. That sounds like her. I'm still learning, he admitted. Some days are harder than others, but I want you to know, That meeting where you revealed yourself? It was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it felt like the worst day of my life at the time. 1 year after I walked into Ascendant as an undercover project coordinator, I stood on the stage at our annual employee summit, looking out at faces that now reflected engagement rather than resignation. My grandmother built this company on a radical idea, I told them, that businesses could prioritize people and still be profitable, that innovation comes from valuing every voice. That leadership means lifting others up, not stepping on them to rise higher. In the front row sat my mother, alongside Imogene. Edmund was there too, more relaxed in semi-retirement. And Nathaniel, no longer the entitled executive, but a valued team member who had earned respect rather than demanded it. The transformation we've achieved together proves my grandmother right, I continued. Our employee satisfaction scores have reached historic highs. Our innovation pipeline is overflowing with ideas from every level of the company. Our profits have increased, not despite our ethical focus, but because of it. I revealed our newest initiative, the Virginia Reed Innovation Center, which would provide resources for employees to develop new ideas during paid work hours. The room erupted in applause. As I concluded my speech, I reflected on the journey. My revenge against Nathaniel hadn't been about destroying him or even punishing him, though he certainly deserved consequences. The true revenge was transforming the company back into what my grandmother intended, forcing those who had corrupted her vision to witness its restoration and eventually participate in it. Seeing Nathaniel become an advocate for the very values he once undermined wasn't a consolation prize, it was the ultimate victory. The entitled executive who had called me worthless garbage now understood the true worth of every person in the organization. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation, not just of circumstances, but of people. My grandmother understood that 60 years ago when she built a company on respect and inclusion. I understood it now, watching her legacy flourish again. If you've stayed with me through this story, I hope it inspires you to consider how you might transform the challenging relationships in your own life. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are capable of the greatest growth, if we're brave enough to show them a better path. Please share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories about turning conflict into positive change. The most powerful legacy we can create is teaching others to see the worth in every person they encounter, even those they once dismissed as worthless.